mal anfangen, falls sich noch ein paar dazugesellen rein. Diese Veranstaltung ist in Englisch angekündigt und ich werde das Gespräch auch in Englisch führen. Braucht jemand eine deutsche Übersetzung der Antworten? Wenn nicht, dann lassen wir das einfach. Das hält nämlich der Zeit auf. Okay. So I just settled that we're just talking. We don't have translations.
Do I interrupt you?
No, but we can coexist. We can battle. Ja, also dann welcome to this panel. I'm glad you made it here. Silly question first. Is this your first time in Germany?
Did you say, is it my first time?
Yes.
It is. Thank you guys for showing up. Yeah, it's my first time in Germany. It's my second time abroad. I only go places where comic book festivals take me, or companies.
Yeah.
So I've done a show in Copenhagen, Denmark, and this is my second.
Fair enough. So your books both came out now in German. When did they first published in the States?
WYSIWYG was self-published from 2005 to 2008, and then the collected book, like the English version of this, came out in 2012, and this came out this book is pretty much new. It came out in December, the US version.
Mm-hmm. So, and this goes hand in hand with other international, so you just made a step into international publishing with these books. So
No, there's a Japanese version of the hip-hop book, and then there's going to be a French and Italian, and there's French, Italian, German, and Spanish WYSIWYG.
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously there are two questions that arise when you're confronted with your work. First is your themes, and second is your way of drawing, the inspiration you got there. It's known that you have been working with famous underground artists, and that you like to cite Crumb as one of your examples. How came it to be? You were born in 1982, I think. Yeah. So that it seems a little unusual for somebody who grew up, let's say in the 90s, to come across to this underground way of comic books. How did this happen?
When I was a child, there was a documentary that was on regular television, on cable, called Comic Book Confidential. It's a really great documentary, and at that time, in the early 80s, I'm like the last vestige of the old school comic book fan who could just go to the grocery store with mom and dad, and while they were shopping for food, I could hang out in the magazine. I would be able to hang out in the magazine section, and there would be these spinner racks full of comics. So I could just choose whatever I wanted, and that was cool. But that was my entire comic book landscape, just Spider-Man and Superman and that kind of comic book. So I saw this documentary, just flicking through stations, and I saw Spider-Man on the screen. And the Spider-Man portion of this documentary was like the end of the superhero part of comics for this film. And then it immediately launched into the underground section, the alternative comic stuff. So I would be like maybe 8 or 9 years old, and when the documentary launched into the underground comic book part, they spoke with Robert Crumb, and they mentioned that his most famous creation is called Fritz the Cat, and on screen they showed many iterations of this character, and one of the earliest, yo, Britney Spears, what's up, man?
Sorry.
One of the earliest iterations that Robert Crumb put together, it showed clear as day that they were just drawings in a notebook. You saw like the blue lines, and so that felt like it democratized comics for me, because I didn't necessarily have access to all the professional tools that the guys who drew Spider-Man had, but I had a pencil and I had notebook paper, so that started me on my path of making comics. And I immediately went to the library. There was a book called Comics by Les Daniels, which is a pretty great one that is a good companion piece for this documentary, because everything talked about in the film, you could actually read full stories from the people you just watched being interviewed. So it had full Robert Crumb stories. Like the underground section was the most interesting. It was titillating. You know, we live in a sort of puritanical society in the States, and the underground section was full of nudity and perversion and drugs, like all this stuff that was kind of like below the surface. That's exciting, and so I gravitated to that. And then as I grew, I understood that the artwork had a certain level of sophistication beyond other comics. You know, like so I started to appreciate it more than just for the prurient interest.
And slowly you came across more of the works, and you could buy them and found them in other stores.
Yeah, I discovered comic shops when I was a teenager. I didn't really know that they existed, and that changed my whole world. I discovered Fantagraphics comics, so that would be the works of like the Hernandez brothers. I'm not sure if they're well known over here. And that was sort of the company that I wanted to be a part of, and a lot of the work that I gravitated to that these people did, it wouldn't necessarily appeal to just the regular comic fan. They were dealing with situations from real life, and that was anomalous in United States comics because it was more about escapism. It's more about just like forgetting yourself and getting excited about Spider-Man doing things or something.
Super hero adventure.
Yeah.
And this brought you on the path to the Cuban school, or you met Harvey Piskor before?
Yeah, so there are several comic book schools in the States, and when I was a boy reading Marvel Comics, you would see these ads for the Joe Kubert School, and Joe Kubert was an editor at a company called DC Comics, and really great cartoonist and artist. So I would see these ads, and I knew I wasn't good enough to get published by one of the big publishers. So the goal in high school was to just become good enough to be able to go to that school, because I would read all these interviews and articles about the school and hear how exclusive it is, and you have to be really awesome to get in there. So that was my goal. And I went there for a year, and it was a weird cusp. I graduated high school in 2000, went there in 2000 and 2001, and that was a weird time in just our culture in general, because we were on the cusp of like the analog to digital way of doing things. So everything that was being told was a little bit obsolete. Computers were going to take over almost immediately, and you could feel it on the surface. So I was getting disappointed with being taught these old methods and ways that were not going to work for getting me an actual job or actually like creating material that could be printed, because we were just using old technologies. So I quit and just went to school to pay off I went to work to pay off my debt from school. And then after I got all that taken care of, I quit my job, saved some money, and I was like, okay, I'm going to become a cartoonist. There is no second plan. There's no safety net. Like, it's either this or I'm going to work in Burger King or McDonald's for the rest of my life. So hooked up with Harvey Piskor. There were 4 major publishers of independent comics in the United States. So the common wisdom was you would create a strip and you would send it to these publishers, and each of those publishers had small anthology magazines, and if they liked your strip, they would publish it in there. So I would send these comics to the different publishers, get rejected routinely.
But just speaking of Fantagraphics, Kitchen Sink,
Fantagraphics, Kitchen Sink, Drawn in Quarterly, and Top Shelf. I would get rejected regularly, and these strips would take me sometimes 2 weeks to draw, and I didn't want them to just rot in my closet. So I started sending those comics to cartoonists who I liked and appreciated. Maybe I could get some feedback from those guys. Harvey Piskor was one of the people that I sent work to, and I never heard anything from him, but the work was never sent back to my house either. So I imagined it hit his mailbox for real. And eventually I did get a call from him to do some work, and that sort of started the whole ball rolling.
That's awesome. That's an interesting way of doing it. Because generally you would meet him at the comic convention or whatever, but sending it around.
Yeah, everybody just has to make their own path. You know, like there really is no textbook way to get involved in this business.
And was it he who inspired you to work in this, well, let's call it old school or old way, or was it before?
No, like I said, that documentary, Comic Book Confidential, but the thing is, Harvey was in that documentary, and he's just a writer, so the strip that he was talking about in that film was drawn by Robert Crumb. So I think it was almost the reverse. Like my style was already of that sort of aesthetic that Harvey Piskor would appreciate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And you started cooperating.
Yeah. The first thing I did for him was a 4-pager for a comic that was about his movie experience. And then I did a 28-page comic. And then we did a 150-page comic, and then a 120-page comic. And then those books, they took years to do. It was just a commercial assignment for me. So I wasn't emotionally invested in the material, and I think that shows on the page. Those works were different than everything else he's done because he made this comic called American Splendor, for those who don't know. And American Splendor is largely an autobiographical comic, but the bigger works that I did with Harvey were biographical stories. One was called Macedonia, and the other was called The Beats, about the Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, William S. Burroughs. So these were atypical projects for Harvey. Even what happened was he made this movie that got a lot of attention in the States. So every major book publisher was sort of like trying to gave him offers. And the way Harvey, he took every offer and just spent his life writing and just had a lot of material to dole out to artists. So I got involved with him in a very fortunate time.
But then you started to create your own stuff, and obviously we're now the themes you use or you're working with. There has been two influences, obviously. The one is hip hop, and the other one is computers. This was always part of your interest?
It was, and the promise that we always hear about in the States about Japanese comics is that manga represents the entire breadth of their culture, meaning there are books for people who have jobs in kitchens, there are manga for your grandmother, and things like that. And in the States, that's divorced from our comic book experience. It's like the majority is superhero stuff, and then the independent comics are still kind of escapist to a large extent. Like they don't really talk about issues that are like just fictional stories or whatever. So my idea was to just share my.
Except in the Analysis Brothers.
I mean, there are exceptions. Yeah, no, there's great stuff, but it's very small and like my sort of scheme is to, because I love comics so much, and I want it to be a sustainable, continuing art form that can even grow and expand. So I wanted to do comics to represent some of these other interests that I have, and really tackle these subjects as intensely as possible to really excite the rabid fans and aficionados of these other subject matters. So like WYSIWYG is about, it's like what we call historical fiction, where the main character is just a cipher that is a composite of like 9 or 10 of like the United States' most famous and notorious computer hackers. And I take that character through the history of high technology, through the history of computer hacking in the States, and I try to handle that material with sensitivity to just sort of excite people who are involved in that computer world. And the Hip Hop Family Tree is just, it's a very linear history of rap music.
Let's say for a moment with this.
Yeah.
Why did you choose to make up a fictional character and not do a biography on the real hackers who got caught?
So, like up until this time, I never wrote and drew a comic professionally myself. I had nothing published that was just all me. So I was just known as an artist, like a mercenary, you know? And so I have no credentials that I could present to these famous hackers to show them the kind, because I wanted to do a biographical comic, but I had no credentials to entice them to trust me with their life stories. So I did the second best thing, which was create a composite of those guys. You change the name, and a few of the situations, it's now a different person. But after like everything I learned with WYSIWYG, I started getting brought out to technology conferences, and the mission, like I accomplished the exact mission I wanted to, because not only was I being brought to book festivals and comic book festivals, I was being brought out to technology conferences. They have hacker conventions. I would get to speak to just different technology companies and stuff like that, and the book really grew within those worlds, and I got to meet a lot of the famous hackers who I borrowed their life experience for my characters. And sort of one of the things that the book was kind of notorious for was how I would like deliberately and in detail show you how to accomplish certain hacks. Some of them are obsolete, but for instance, like there is a detailed way to create a false identity in America, like fake papers and stuff. And the way that I found that information was by reading interviews with a famous hacker, like 20 years worth of interviews, where you would read something from the 90s, and he would talk about how, because he was a fugitive for years, he would just have different identities and just bounce around the States. And he would talk about how he created these fake identities, but he would leave some information out. But if you read 20 interviews over 20 years, you can piece together everything. So I pieced it together, and in a very detailed fashion, like describe it in the comic. And I met him at a convention. It's like, yes, you like crack the code, like that's how you do it. And it can never change, because anything short of like taking blood from every single person who's born, you know, the only way that we can verify your ID is from photographs and signatures and stuff like that. So he's like, yeah, there's no way around it. Like, it'll always be this way. They're just putting laws in place that will basically make you disappear if you ever get caught doing that sort of thing.
So yeah, now you're also on the list of some government agencies.
You know, that's not a crazy idea, because like when Hip Hop Family
Turns out everybody's on the list of some.
Yeah. When the first printing of Hip Hop Family Tree hit the States, it got the cavity search from customs. Like, it was stopped at the border. It was like every single book was like looked through. It took an extra like month and a half to get our books like out of government hands, and like it could be a coincidence, but.
So you mean after revealing details here, you feared you're going to reveal new details about?
I don't know. I think it was like, you know, there are weird, intimidating things that governments are known to do sometimes.
Somebody told me there was another cover plan for this book in Germany and didn't like it. Sure.
Oh, that would be the hip hop book.
The hip hop.
Yeah, it was crap.
Okay.
Yeah, and
Is
a lot
this
of
the original cover now?
No, I drew that because of that crap cover that they designed, and I just couldn't accept it. It was so bad, and people came up and like introduced themselves, and they were like, "That was really funny when you tweeted that." So it's.
So what does the original cover look like?
I have it on my phone. I'm showing people.
It's okay. Connect to the big screen. Or
yeah, it's too bad. But it's really
just show it to me.
Yeah. And tell me that's not garbage. And I said that maybe the designer got paid 2 cents to design it. And I think that resonated.
But now let's no. Tell me about your affinity to hip hop.
So I was born in 1982. I was raised in basically an all-black neighborhood, and in '82, hip hop was already spread throughout the country. It was considered a fad, like it wasn't going to last for long. but in my neighborhood it was huge. And where my house was settled, my house is in between 3 playgrounds where hip-hop things were being done at any given time. There was a basketball court with only 2 hoops, and maybe dozens of people who wanted to play on those hoops. So everybody who was waiting for their turn, they would just hang out and rap. There were playgrounds where people just had big sound systems and they were dancing. So I saw this routinely as a kid, so I was always involved in it, always a fan. And I always wanted to do a comic book within this hip-hop landscape, this 1970s, 1980s New York landscape. I really love the fashion, I love graffiti.
Even though it was before you were...
Yeah, yeah. I shouldn't be required to like something.
No, not really, but it just seldom happens. I mean, people are writing about the Middle Ages, of course, they're not around.
Sure.
But normally, I guess, the interest of people is their own life, their own youth, but seldom 10 or 20 years before.
In Pittsburgh, the area became really hurt and diminished by the lack of industry because the steel mills went away. So my neighborhood looked like the Bronx to an extent. So I identified spiritually almost with just kind of like what they were going through. And as I would hear about hip-hop and its origins, I kind of was inspired by that because they were in sort of a destitute situation. They weren't expected to accomplish anything, but through this community, they found a way to create a voice and a system to escape poverty. And that was, I mean, there's almost nothing more inspirational than that.
So the comic book world nearly lost you to hip-hop and to be the second element?
No, never. I want to be very clear. Never. Like I always want to be very clear that like I don't rap, I don't break dance. I tried to do graffiti, but I was terrible at it because also the people who do graffiti, at least in Pittsburgh, are hardcore. They'll fight over it and they'll like really hurt people. And I'm just a nerd. I just want to hang out and draw. Like I don't want to like look over my shoulder, scared if people are going to come after me or something.
So this is basically a history book, isn't it?
It is. It is like the
documentary comic.
Yeah, the sort of scheme that I've created for myself is to try to make comics that appeal to comic fans, but they also learn about these other interests that I like. And I also want to make comics that are for people of these subcultures, hip-hop and computer culture, geek culture. And I want to introduce them to the language of comics. So that's sort of the twofold thing that I keep in the back of my mind when I make my stuff.
In the Erlangen catalog, there are 3 pages where you compare the comics to the...
Yeah, that's in the back there.
Yeah. Share your thoughts about it.
Yeah, like my thoughts have expanded like way beyond that little 3-page story. But from the very beginning days, hip-hop was influenced by American comics through the works of cartoonists like Von Baudet and Jack Kirby, the creator of like all the big superheroes from Marvel Comics. His influence is all throughout early graffiti culture, and graffiti as part of the culture of hip-hop was like the most monetized component to hip-hop because graffiti canvases were hanging in galleries and being sold for $25,000 in the early 80s. So the graffiti artists made more money than rappers at that time. And then there's an evolution where rap records start to have picture sleeves, and they would commission their favorite comic book artists to draw album covers. And then another evolution where rappers started writing comics. And
examples? You have examples?
Yeah, and they're all bad because my comic is like an answer to like, because what the rappers would do, they would create almost vanity projects. So it would be like Method Man from the Wu-Tang Clan would make a comic about him fighting demons and shit like that. And to me, his life story is far more interesting, being raised in a place where he had to escape poverty, and he's like one of the lucky people who got to go on and accomplish cool things. Like, let's hear about that. Like, so that's like what my comic is. Let's hear about that, not some like escapist thing where you could turn into a werewolf if you drink a special potion or something.
But I can picture why they would like to see themselves in this way.
Yeah, it's almost like, you know, in the States, like these like technology millionaires, they buy big yachts and stuff. Like, so it's just like a toy to them. But I have like, comics is everything to me. Comics is like the greatest art form in creation to me. So it's like, okay, if you're an outsider like coming in and you're just kind of like, it's just a toy to you. It almost insults me.
I see. About the style, this your influence can be seen, but generally you would say this is a normal style for telling what we around here call graphic novels. I'd like to come to this term after a while, but this one is special in the way that the colors are done, in the way we use screen tones, also rasterfolien. And my first question is not why you did it, because this could be kind of obvious. It's about the time. But how did you do it? Did you do it old school, or did you use computers to generate it?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time on the computer to try to make it look like it was not made on the computer. And the valuable thing with going to that that art school, and being taught that old, antique, forgot about way of doing things, is I was able to create a virtual process within the computer that sort of replicated the old style of American comics production and coloring that was used like the first 100 years. So I kind of like manufactured that digitally. And in hip hop, there's a term called sampling, where you take like a little bit of a famous record and then you loop it and you make a new song. So the color of the comic, that's like my sampling, because I just will grab the color from scanned comic books, because I want it to look dirty. I want it to look like it's already been read a million times. So the red is like Superman's cape, and the blue is probably Superman's costume from a comic book or something like that. And the paper texture, I definitely know that that's from Hawkman #9 from 1967. Yeah.
Well, they never did the colors. They just wrote in numbers for the printers to add.
They did, and so what I did, like, they would have a color chart that would correspond. So I found that color chart, and I created the entire palette. They had a palette of 64 colors for the first 100 years of American comics, and I created my own value, like my own color scheme, based on the mixtures that they describe in those charts.
There's all this I would call it non-color, like the trunks, Hulk, and some other costumes. This is just, I don't know, 40-40 or something, blue and red they gave. This color never happens anywhere else.
Yeah. In fact, like if you have 64 colors at your disposal, but you really only use about 14 or 15 of them, because a lot of them are really, really ugly.
Yeah.
They're like olive greens.
And that was always my impression with the early superhero comics. They just wrote in some numbers and let's see what comes out.
Yes, it was all about cheapness and expedience.
You know, by my special power being extremely myopic, I can see that your way is different from the original. Because it's more regular.
Right. Like I did what I could to create that.
When you look at it and it looks perfect, but when I use my microscopic view, I can see that your screen tones are straight lines. The original often create small islands.
Yeah, I could have done that. But I really want the storytelling of my comics to be read very, very clearly for the people who, like, to be a comics reader, you already have a built-in sort of sophistication and you know how to read the comics page. But I want to appeal to comics people, but like I said, this might be the first comic that a lot of people read, so it needs to be very clear. And I could have played around with the color to get it to look perfect, but it could be confusing to people.
I said you don't expect people to read it like this.
Yeah,
But,
I actually do because I have a lot of obsessive compulsive friends.
Okay, so I get it when you have errors that they are on purpose. It's like this.
Yeah, so there are certain, like, it's the idea of, you know, with that rap comic, like, it's like, I have to convey sound visually. So the best way I could think to do that was to create some little vibration kind of.
Out of sync.
Yeah.
The color tones are out of sync.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you can see that it's on purpose because it's just on some panels on the same page.
Yep.
If you're on the whole page. But still, even if you want to tell a story of rap and hip hop, and in these times, you could have used a more general style. What made you go back to this really outdated, if you call it, a way of producing a comic?
Yeah, I just
the
wanted
look of it.
Yeah, I just wanted it to look like a comic that was ripped out of time. So the story takes place from the mid-70s to 1981, and I wanted it to look like a comic from that era. And that's, you know, that's simply the reason why I did it. I also, you know, I mean, it's a very long answer, but I just gave you like the basic broad strokes.
No, for me, for example, it's quite fascinating because I grew up with the Marvel comic books. They were printed in Germany about 10-15 years later than the original, so I'm not that old. But still, this reminds me a lot of the earliest books I read. So what were the reactions from other people? I think this must have provoked many reactions.
Yeah, people in America like really dug it, and it's sort of a big hit. Like this isn't an exact representation of that book because the original book is really big, and like the paper that I chose.
Tell the story why you want like.
Oh yeah, so the hip hop book from the States is really big because it's inspired by, in the 70s there was a comic called Superman versus Muhammad Ali.
There was been a German edition of that.
And being raised in an all-black neighborhood, the only comic that a lot of my friends' parents had on the bookshelf was a copy of Superman versus Muhammad Ali. So I wanted to sort of have my book be that exact same size, so that maybe those same people would have two comics and they could like line up perfectly nicely on the bookshelf. So I made a lot of effort to like try to get the exact paper that they used to print that on, wanted the color aesthetic to look the same, and I largely accomplished that, and a lot of that was not lost on a lot of people. So that kind of separated it.
If you stroll around the dealer sections downstairs, you probably can get a German edition of this.
The German edition is around.
It wasn't. I think it was smaller than the American one. I think it was a little bit above the normal size of an album, but it wasn't the original size.
Yeah.
And this was a quite famous book. Also, it had a lot of people of the comic business in the background as spectators. Yeah.
In what?
Then Muhammad Ali.
Oh yeah.
You had all these people, many of them comic creators, numbered, and you could.
I mean, just people from American pop culture.
Yeah,
like,
also
like politicians, and you could find Richard Nixon in there. And, like in the crowd.
In the crowd, yeah. I think they even put Clark Kent in, which doesn't make sense. But okay. So great. I'd like to. Before I do that, I think we just had a small little exchange before we started about the word graphic novel. Just tell me how graphic novel is seen in the United States.
Yeah, I mean it is just a pure kind of marketing term. Like any cartoonist in America is kind of suspicious of another cartoonist who says that they make graphic novels. Like we're cartoonists, and we're very proud to be cartoonists. Like you don't have to call it anything special, and we make comic books. But I understand like now that the New York literary scene is interested in comics, it gives a kind of like sophistication to call them graphic novel, and that's fine. But like you just will never hear that word like really come out of my mouth, just because I'm sort of conditioned by every other cartoonist in America that like if you say it, like you might be a punk because there were like charlatans and infiltrator cartoonists who were like have some big wild idea and they got like a lot of money and they made a really shitty comic, but it had like graphic novel in it, and then that was the one that they made. So they kind of diluted our culture.
Well, the term itself is quite old. It was not invented, but first introduced by Will Eisner.
Yeah,
a long time ago.
Right, and he wrote a book called Comics and Sequential Art, and he called himself a sequential artist and not a cartoonist. And it's like, listen, settle down, you're a cartoonist.
Yeah, right.
Sequential artist.
But what also amuses me greatly is that the first things that really were called graphic novels were collections of Marvel books.
Right. So it's just like they took comic books.
They took some
and put a spine on it and called it a novel.
And that was graphic novels.
Yeah, that's silly.
So that's where the terms in comic really originates. Okay, yeah. This I just wanted to add because this is exactly my opinion.
Right.
I'd like to end the now to questions from the audience. If there are any, don't be shy. You even can ask in German if you want. I translate it. Okay, think about it. So what's the next project? What are you working on?
So the hip hop book is actually going to be a series, and I'm going to make at least 6 of them. So the second one is coming out in America in a couple of months.
So that's why I call the early years.
Yeah, and they're, well, I was going to say, like on the spine of the American one, there's a big number 1 right here to delineate that it will be a series, but they kind of fudge it.
I think they wait if it sells.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Then they can put on the second.
Yeah, that makes sense. So there's going to be at least 6 of those, and that's a part of my kind of 5-year plan. So I'll be on that for the next half decade.
Are you going to change the style of the graphics with the years?
Yeah, I am, but I'm only going to take the best production aesthetics to use in my comic.
Makes sense, like Neil Adams.
There were some ugly periods in the 80s when it came to comics production and coloring, and I'm not going to just like really make crappy looking comics just because they all looked crappy in like 1984. But I'm going to take like the best of that spirit and try to make something cool. It's like it might look old, like I might make it look like it's out of time, but I try to still create a comic that's an evolution of what existed back then rather than just completely falling into that.
You could do some black and white stuff in this time because it's independent market.
That's true.
Put in some Ninja Turtles. So.
Yeah, right.
No, but it's interesting. So this is quite a long project.
Yeah. I'm halfway done with the 3rd book right now. I put 2 pages online every week, and after 45 weeks, there's enough material for a book. But designing the books, which is something I'm very proud to do, because I feel like cartoonists should just involve themselves in every step of the production process to try to make it as perfect as possible. But like to design the books, that takes me like 2 or 3 months to like really choose the cover image and all of the other stuff that goes along with just making a nice book.
We had a discussion yesterday here about the coming of the e-comic and so on. So what's the connection to the... I'd like to say that online comic is not the same as e-comic. E-comic is a content you can buy. So what's your take is you publish it as an online comic?
Yeah, so I put it online each week. I sort of, like I'm not calibrated to read things on a screen, but I understand that there are kids and just people who are very happy to look at a screen and read their material that way. So I will present my work in any way that anybody wants to read it, but for me, I always have the object in mind. Like I want to make beautiful books. So doing the hip hop comic online, it also has an extra bonus of kind of crowdsourcing the editing. I make a lot of effort to get the story as accurate as possible, but we all know that people very happily like to anonymously correct you if you say something wrong online. Like, people will swoop in and be very excited to like let you know that you're an idiot. It's never happened yet, but if I screw up, I'm sure somebody's going to tell me. So I use the online component for that as well. But what I am making is an experience that is meant to be like, you know, like you can lay in bed and like read and then flip back and things like that. Like I might have certain things on some pages that you might remember and like have to go back.
I did this recently.
Yeah, and so
I wanted to try to find out if the people who bullying in the bathroom are the same guys who bullied him years before.
Right. Yeah, so I don't know how easy that is to do like on some kind of digital device. It's like less pleasing. But whatever.
There's good things. When you say you like that creative control about how your comics are published, we just had this panel where some of the artists said they like doing it in an ebook format because you could add some, you know, informations with a click, or in your case you could add music samples or something.
Yeah, that's true. But like I said, I want to create a tangible thing that has a look and a feel, and it's not like my book. Yes, it tells a story, but like I'm not just telling the story. Like if you have an e-comic, a web comic, you're interested in the story subject. Like, but I want to make an awesome book.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So, second try. Yeah!
Hi.
You can try to...
Hello? Yeah. Sorry, I haven't heard the complete discussion, but I'd like to know, when I read both books, I thought there was a point which they have in common, but they are both about the countercultures of the 70s. Would you agree to this?
Yeah, I can make a strong argument that hip-hop is a form of hacking, because the true spirit of what it means to be a hacker is to take found objects in existence and create a use for them that wasn't the original intent. So the idea of taking your mom's record collection and just using little pieces of different songs to create a continuous loop that you can sing over top of is a form of hacking to me. But another thing that like really interests me, like comics fits in with computer hacking, fits in with hip-hop culture, in what I like to call trash pop culture in America. And it's not trash to me. I love comics, I love all this stuff, but it's trash to like your parents. It makes your mom and dad nervous if you read comics too late in life. Mainstream society, they don't like rap music. Computer hacking scares the pants off of everybody. So I just like stuff that makes the mainstream kind of skittish or nervous. Like I want people to look at you in a weird way if you're like reading my comic. You know, like if they're like hacking, like what is this kid about?
So the next project would be about the gay community.
I mean, there's some good stuff out there already, but like I would make stuff about like skateboarding or like professional wrestling or something like that, because that's like another.
It's more mainstream, isn't it? Professional wrestling.
Yeah, like.
Or a different kind of subculture.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about like the 1980s when everybody looked like carnival people. That's interesting to me.
And we'll find out if the flags are fixed.
Yeah, I think we all know the answer to that one.
Really? Okay. Well, another question out there. Yeah, you did.
Both books are about history, or are history books. How close do you want to get to history? Did you research? Did you talk to witnesses of that time? Or is it secondary literature? Like, what was your idea for it? Like, how close did you want to go?
Okay, so with WYSIWYG, I initially self-published several volumes of that. The first book was completely put together And actually, this goes along with the hip hop thing as well. The first book of both was all constructed from found materials, interviews, articles, essays. But then, as this material kind of spreads around, it gained, for the hacking thing and the hip hop thing, it gained sort of legitimacy within those cultures. So now I would have, like, when I did the second WYSIWYG book, I had access to people that I could call and talk to. And the same with the hip hop thing. Like, I have famous rappers call me all the time. And it always trips me out. But it's great that I can, if I have a question about something, like there are people who I could call. But this first volume, it was all from found stuff. I sort of consider myself almost to be like a curator of information rather than just a cartoonist, because I'm kind of giving you like a good sample of like all this material that I read and vetted and put together to try to create something that has some linear kind of logic to it.
It's not only the people and the characters, also the tools they use.
Yeah, the visual reference. I mean, that's sort of fun for me to like find the exact equipment and try to get that part of it right.
That's
Yeah.
the first computer when we gets it. The phone modem. I think we used one of them, of course. Okay. Further questions? I thought it's very interesting. What's going on here? Should be seen. No, well, I'm very impressed, and I really like the stuff you're doing. So for me, everything's completely clear. I don't have further questions. Maybe only how did the transition from a high school student to being a comic artist, where you just sketched it a little bit, but it was clear for you that you wanted to stay in this medium, to start in this medium.
Yeah. Like if you were to meet people who I went to school with my entire life, it would not be a surprise that I make comics. Like everybody just sort of, it was like an understood thing, and it was actually when I grew up, like in the '90s in high school and stuff, comics was actually considered kind of cool. Like everybody bought them because there was a speculator boom. Comics were artificially worth a lot of money. So every kind of football player, every kind of like football player, all the cool kids, they would grab comics, and I was already reading comics. So at this point, I was just like I didn't have to worry about like opening them up at school. Like it was fine. And then when it became less cool and everybody sort of went away from comics, I already had some drawing ability. So it was like, oh yeah, you guys are all dorks for reading comics, but Ed's cool because he draws. He's gonna draw those books. So like I got a free pass and got to still hang with the cool kids and stuff.
And it was always comics, not something else in the graphic business.
No, always comics, always comics. And I guess the only difference would be I wanted to draw comics when I was younger, so I wanted to draw like Spider-Man and stuff like that. But then I realized that most of the people who draw that stuff are just kind of like trying to escape having to work a regular job. Like they don't have any ideas. They just want to draw things, and that seems like childish to me, to just like want to just draw Spider-Man fighting the Rhino all the time. And so I have like an actual I want to make stories.
I found it interesting, and in the catalog but also here, that the superhero panels here have not been drawn by you.
Yeah.
Why actually?
Because I wanted them to have like a Jack Kirby kind of aesthetic, and I didn't want to like reverse Jack Kirby's drawing style. And so I have access to a friend who could draw like that guy in his sleep. So why not utilize your homeboys?
I really love Spawn drawn in a way like you would have looked in the 60s or...
Yeah, I mean that's just how I would draw them.
Yeah. So we can't expect any superhero specials from you.
Well, I have superhero stories in mind, but if I was ever to do them for Marvel Comics or something like that, they they kind of have to let me have a lot of creative control, because like I have hit a position where like I can sort of do what I want, and so I'm not gonna like take a step backwards and have like an editor tell me what to do or something like that, because every time I go against an editor, I end up being nominated for awards and stuff. So like I just can't trust it. Yeah, I just have to just let me do my thing, man, and then I promise you'll look good in the end.
It would be something like maybe you did Silver Surfer or X-Men.
That's what it would have to be. It would have to be like a specialized thing. I would never do it every month or anything like that.
Batman Noir or something.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm through all my questions. Last chance, last honest piece. No?
Thank you guys very much for showing up. I appreciate it. All right.
Show us if it stands.